Welcome back to Inside Athletic Training and our Tales of the Tape series detailing the ins and outs of Tommy John surgery with experts in the athletic training and sports medicine field. On this week's final episode of Tales of the Tape, the Tommy John series, we sit down with Tampa Bay Rays head athletic trainer and longtime Major League Baseball veteran Joe Benge to discuss the final piece of the Tommy John surgery puzzle, which is the return to play planning. Joe walks us through in great detail his strategies for players who are returning to play from Tommy John surgery. He'll share important milestones and timelines and what it takes as an athletic trainer to get a player back on the field after this major surgery. Thanks again for listening to Tales of the Tape, the Tommy John podcast series. Stay tuned for PBAT's next installment of Tales of the Tape, releasing soon. Enjoy the show.
So as we wrap up our Tommy John surgery here on the podcast, we're joined today by Joe Benge, the head athletic trainer for the Tampa Bay Rays. We're going to go diving into what I consider the really fun part and the exciting part of the process of returning a player from Tommy John surgery. But before we get there, Joe, if you wouldn't mind, could you just give us a quick synopsis of your journey on how we came to this moment of you and I talking, but more importantly, how you became the head athletic trainer for the Tampa Bay Rays?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Corey. Absolutely for the opportunity. And obviously, you and I have known each other a long time, back through the minor leagues, through the coordinator role, and here we are today. So I was fortunate enough to actually start as a PBATS intern back in 1999 with Richie Banseld and Brian Ebel, who's obviously now the head athletic trainer of the Orioles. From there, they helped me progress to a full season internship with the Boston Red Sox in 2000. We're dating back to when Chris Carenti was the coordinator and Jim Rowe was the head athletic trainer. And from there, I passed my exam before I even called my family. The first person I called was Richie and Brian, and they happened to have an opening. They knew somebody was retiring. I was hired to the Baltimore Orioles to start in 2001. I spent 2001 through 2010 with the Baltimore Orioles. And at that moment was Ron Porterfield, the then head athletic trainer of the Tampa Bay Rays, reached out to interview for the Durham Bulls position. So I took a leap of faith. You know, for all, those of us who have been in the game, we know you kind of take that one level jump as a leap of faith. And I did, and spent 1 year in Durham with the Durham Bulls, and the next 7 years after that as the coordinator. When Ron moved on to the Los Angeles Dodgers for opportunities and family reasons, I was promoted to head athletic trainer, and have been head athletic trainer since 2018. Have had an opportunity to work with just tremendous people. Started with Mark Vincent and Mike Sandoval. I still have Mike with me, and it's progressed on to Aaron Scott and Brad Epstein and Joel Smith and Wilson Diaz, and just a host of people that help make my day easier. So it's been quite a journey of 25 plus years.
Yeah, that's every athletic trainer has their own story and has their own journey, but so many of us, as you mentioned, started out as PBATS interns and started out at lower levels and worked their way up the right way through the game. And it's just great to see when that kind of comes to fruition and you're doing a great job as an athletic trainer. So today, as I said, we're going to be diving into the fun part of the TJ rehab, as we call it. And we're going to be talking mostly from about month 5, 6, on into the return to play phase when the pitcher's back or position player's back playing. So let's start talking about those end times, those end stages of the rehab process. And you're starting to think about adding in plyometrics and throwing activity. Take us through what that looks like for an athlete. What do you like to use as your first step into reintroducing throwing activity for an athlete?
Well, as far as reintroduction, and, I do obviously want to make sure, I'm clear. Obviously, I travel and it's a team effort with us. It's not a, hierarchical top-down approach. We have a rehab group who deals with this, and they do an amazing job. And the minor leagues, the major leagues, and it's headed up with Joel Smith and Brad Epstein. So I do want to make sure as we get through this, they get the full credit as I'm traveling and they're with them and as we communicate. But from the Tampa Bay Rays standpoint, it does start with plyometrics, but it also, and we'll probably get into this later, it starts with making sure they're ready to progress to plyometrics. And I think, plyometrics for us, when we started, was we knew it as one thing. Now we know there's throwing plyometrics, and there's different kind of plyometrics they go through in the off season. And those aren't dirty words. It's just we have to make sure that when we say plyometrics, we're firmly speaking about the one hand, two hand. How are we loading concentric? How are we, progressing, or, eccentric, concentric, and getting into the stretch shortening cycle after that, getting ready explosively to get into throwing. So, we can speak towards, even just a simple body blade, and how, as you incorporate before you even are going, as you're progressing, what is that doing down in and through the UCL? How is that training your muscles to react in a concentric, stability, eccentric manner? And then as you're going through, and again, I know everybody's going to have their own order organizationally that they may feel, but as you start into a two hand, and as you use that 4-week ramp up to get from a two hand to a one hand, for us, that's how we start, as well as long as the range of motion, the strength, the comparison strength, and the ability to progress and handle both concentric, eccentric, and understand that you're explaining to them that they're not going to feel 100%, that there are going to be bumps in the road, and that everybody's going to have an ending to their own story. And I'm assuming that's something we'll touch again on later, but that gaining advice and guidance from those around you is so critically important, but to realize that everybody's going to have their own outcome. So to stay close with your rehab group, to stay close with the people that know you the best day to day, and to trust the process.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there that, you want to make sure that the athlete's ready even to take on plyometrics in a throwing program. So, when we started in this game, Joe, it was a lot of, I thought he was strong enough. He kind of passed some of the benchmarks we like to see, in the athletic training room or in the weight room. But now with so much more technology out there and so many more gadgets that we have to sift through, and are they reliable? Are they validated? But, you talked about strength, comparing bilaterally and what they were pre-injury. And how do you go about now in today's world of feeling really comfortable saying, yes, this athlete is ready to go? What steps do you take specifically to know that time is there?
I think obviously none of us want to get to this point. We would rather have all of our brother and his sister in board without rehabs, but we know we're going to get there. And when we do, we hope that we've done a good job of collecting our baseline numbers when they were healthy. So a large part of that goes to our sports science group, to our performance group, starting in spring training, even some of those numbers that we might have for somebody who shows up to an early camp in Port Charlotte or something early in Tropicana Field. And so we have a baseline number. Do we know that's always the case? No. Sometimes somebody's not going to be willing to give a baseline number, and that is their comfort level. That is, we understand that for the older player. But when you have that baseline number, it's the ability to go back technologically through either, a force frame, through a handheld method modality, through something such as, the VALD, something that's going to give you your feedback that you and your organization are comfortable with, and having the ability to look comparison. Was there a deficit even at time that they reported to that camp? Were they where you wanted them in a bilateral comparison state? You have to be able to answer that question, because I think, Corey, obviously what we dealt with and, where PBATS has come from, and what we know now and what we knew then and what we don't know yet in the future, we know that our hands-on probably wasn't enough, but we were doing our best. And now that we have these method modes and modalities, there's no excuse to not use them to collect and to be able to ask a broader question, because we shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed to say, well, what was he in spring training? I'm going to admit I don't know everybody's numbers every day of every second, but I do know that our group does an amazing job of collecting it. So for us, it's the ability to look back and say, okay, you are deficient here. We need to address this. Does it necessarily mean you're going to pause throwing? No. It just talks about how far off you are. But it also does mean that you have an opportunity to potentially push back throwing if we aren't getting where we need to be before we feel comfortable to start introducing those stresses across the joint and across the soft tissue.
It's a great way of looking at it. And, that really does help us set up, especially throughout the entire process, where we're at early in the stages of throwing versus later, and how much you can push a guy, how much you have to pull a guy back. Every little bit of information helps in that process. So now as we're starting to set up the throwing program, you're face to face with that athlete. They're excited. They want to get going right away. They've been waiting months and months and months. They've been doing this their entire life, and we've taken throwing away from them during their rehab process, and now they're getting it back, and they're excited. So what's the conversation like with the player? How do you set it up? Do you like to do monthly goals? Do you like to just say, hey, look, this is our end destination, and we got to get there, and this is how we're going to get there? What's your process in setting up a throwing program and having that conversation with your player?
I think for me, for us, for how we handle it and, what that looks like from myself, Brad, Joel, down through Sarah and Colleen, Thirsty down through the minor leagues, and Marty, everybody, you have to approach your athletes without a concrete, this is how we're going to handle you. You have to know each player. Some players are going to want full information, and we know that full information is going to change. Handle every calendar with a pencil and eraser, because for every smooth rehab, we know there's going to be 9 bumpy ones that still may get there at the same end range, but you're going to have to make some adjustments.
Sure.
So I think that's one of the biggest adjustments that I probably learned and appreciated watching one specific rehab years ago as I was kind of starting to gain exposure and transitioning to the major leagues with Ron and Paul Harker at the time, and Mark Vincent, was really appreciating how they handled one particular rehab and that person, and how they didn't necessarily have a long toss component to who they were, and talking them through that. And I think watching that from afar kind of gave me the appreciation now for how we all handle it as a group, which is, hey, look, this is where you are. This is where we want you to be. And this is our goal end range for you, not end date. Don't give end dates. We know dates are going to change. End range. In this period of time is when we see your first bullpen. Probably give them that as dangling their first carrot. Some people are happy with that. We have very mature, very well put together athletes, all of us, and we have very mature, but also very scattered athletes. And some of them want to know, well, I don't care when my first bullpen is, when's my first game? Okay, if everything goes to course, we see it in this month, not this day, not this series with that affiliate. We see it in this month. But please understand that this could shift because of X, Y, Z. And we're going to build in, deloading weeks, and we're going to do some different things along the way, and we're going to listen to your body. And guess what? We haven't spoken to your surgeon yet either, and we're going to have those periodic follow-ups along the way, so they have a stake in this as well. So try and educate them as we sit them down to say, I'm not going to tell them, hey, here's 45 feet, 90 feet. Hey, your starting is going to be stock throws into 45 feet, and your ending is going to be here, and in between there's going to be variability, but we are going to hit all the benchmarks of your 45, 60, 90, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's just how you educate each athlete and how they leave the table and how they absorb the information is, for me, how we handle the 2024 baseball player versus maybe how you and I handled the 2001 baseball player.
Sure. And you made a good point there, and let's segue into kind of that communication that you have to have with the surgeon, right? That's the artist and that put this player back together, so to speak. So, it's not just, hey, look, yep, the car's fixed and we don't have to go back to the mechanic anymore. No. We have to talk to that surgeon throughout this process. And I think those of us that have stayed in the game a long time have always had those great relationships with those surgeons. So what's the conversation like with the surgeon? How often do you check back in with them? Is the player comfortable talking with his surgeon? Just kind of take us through those conversations, because obviously it's so important to make sure that no one's in the dark during this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that one of the main things is keeping the open channel. It doesn't mean that we are running back to our surgeons and the player isn't, but we all know that we've had athletes that are incessantly reaching out because they just don't know what this new normal is. What is my new body? How am I feeling? And they're panicking. And I think it's the really good surgeons, and we work with all of them. I don't think there's a surgeon that I could name in the game that won't communicate directly with one of their players. Now, sometimes the players need to realize that the surgeon isn't just waiting for their call, so they might have to wait a little bit, but they get back to them. And I think personally that surgeons today, have evolved with the player because they understand that the player is more educated, the player is more self-aware, more body aware, and is more willing to challenge themselves, but also more willing to listen to advice. So I think that's a big part of it when you speak about the surgeon. So with us and how we deal with the surgeon, we deal with them obviously straightforward, forward-facing, nothing hidden. It's so important to make sure that the surgeon knows as you're going along certain benchmarks are being hit, but that you're not necessarily over-communicating in a way that they're not understanding the context, because we're going to go through normal soreness. We're going to go through bumps in the road. And when you're far away, you hear things can sound more concerning than they are. So our mindset is just more communicate. We know when their follow-up benchmarks are. We feel confident enough as a rehab group that we know when something's not right, we're going to communicate immediately. We're not going to push through. We're going to say, hey, this is where we are. What are your thoughts? Sometimes they'll end up, on the traditional anti-inflammatory. Sometimes it's you know what? That's the way that I found a lot of my surgeries will end up having that pattern of feedback. Don't worry. You're good to keep going. And with those conversations, we as a rehab group also mature because we start to understand the patternings of that surgeon. So I think it's just as important for us as professionals as it is for the athlete, because we can give proper feedback. The surgeon stays firmly involved and the player realizes everybody's working for their best benefit and as a whole.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and to your point, it takes a village, and you keep bringing up all these other professionals that are working around the athlete as their rehab team. So let's dive into that a bit. What is the rehab group and team look like at the Rays? I think when you and I started, it was us and maybe a pitching guy that was working the rookie ball and would come over and watch our rehabs throw bullpens and then go work the game, in the backfield. So things have changed quite drastically since those days. So what does the entire team look like? How does everybody work together? How do you not have too many cooks in the kitchen? How do you keep people in their lane, but while giving bandwidth to work with each other? How does that look in today's game?
Yeah, I think for us as an organization, and Corey, I go back to what you just said, and as I started with Baltimore so many years ago, majority of the rehabs fell on the minor league coordinator. And so Dave Walker was doing the rehabs, and it was where we could help and extend it and how we were helping progress and what catcher was available to catch a side at the time. And so it was still a village back then, but it was a lot more of a stressed village. Like for us now and how we've grown. So let's just use the major league side as an example. We have a tremendous group. So it starts with Brad Epstein and Joel Smith. They work hand in hand, tandem. Their personalities work tremendous together. There is no, this is my athlete, that is your athlete. It's group. If one works with one the other day and the other happens to be more like side driven or more outside with a position player, they communicate at the end of the day. They're aware of what's going on with everybody. So it starts there. It starts with the communication. It starts with the willingness to work together. It starts with leaving the ego at the table. And, we all have communication channels. It can be WhatsApp, it could be text, it could be whatever it may be. And so there's where the communication comes in when we're not at the trop every day. We know what's going on, setbacks, success stories, muddling, change of directions, everything like that. From there, they're firmly supported. Chung Kao is our rehab strength coach, longtime strength coach in the game, tremendous skill set, tremendous teacher. And so he's there full time with the rehabs, which we feel is an asset. A year ago, it was Brian King, and Brian did an awesome job. So we've been able to support them as we've moved roles around. And I think Chung is going to do an amazing job with that. And he has been. It's been awesome. We also have one of your old friends, Corey, and Rick Knapp. Rick Knapp is our pitching coach, and he is with the rehabs. And I think that's one of the most critical things that we do is provide that coach 24 hours a day with them, because that coach is also the communicator back to everybody. Joel and Brad and I communicate. And of course, I communicate with Nappy on occasion, but really they're my communication. And he's the one who's passing along a lot of the pitching information. He's passing along a lot of the data that is going to matter in the progression back towards our major league pitching coach, our major league group. And then he actually will track them and go out and start the rehab and kind of hand the baton off. which I think is wildly critical, because if you think about it, it's really super unfair to have a rehab who's very comfortable in his, rehab cocoon, and all of a sudden you kick him on the plane and he's working with a pitching coach that maybe he's never spent any time with.
Right.
And so here's Nappy is going to take that baton and he's going to hand it off to one of our affiliate pitching coaches, usually Durham. And once they're comfortable, he fades to black. And then, Brian Reith will take it the rest of the way with firm communication backwards when the player is healthy. And we entrust our AAA athletic trainers and specialists there as well to kind of, take the baton. That being said, we also have a full-time bullpen catcher, and he does so much more than that. And he's available. So we have somebody there who's playing catch every day with the same people. And not that the athletic trainers and everybody else doesn't, but he's there, he's catching, he's seeing it. And that's another set of eyes that sometimes will be like, hey, I didn't like how that looked today. And it alerts. So I think it's just another layer of protection when you create that continuity in staff, that people have the ability and not fear to cross lanes and say, hey, heads up. And it just trickles down. Doesn't matter what your credentialing, what your specialization is. It's one goal to get that player back.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a growth in that space since when we started in this game. And again, you look at it and you go, well, this is like its own affiliate. This is like its own team, especially with the injury rates going up, unfortunately, in the game. We're having more and more players that are put into these groups, and why not have somebody dedicated on the pitching side, on the strength conditioning side, on the sports medicine side, to make sure that these players do return, because that's such an important part, especially later in the season when you have a player come back and you might not have to make a trade or might not have to do something transaction-wise because the player's coming back. That's a big piece to a team in the long term. So it's great to see that clubs are starting to realize this and really surround these players with the needs that they have. So when you're throwing, getting out, you're starting your long toss phase, and now we're starting to look at the mound progression, and that's when every player gets really, really excited to get back on the mound. There's a lot of different throwing programs out there. There's a lot of different thought processes. Some people like to use flat ground, where you're just throwing like a bullpen but not on a mound. Some people like to use less of a gradual slope, so it's like a half mound or a full to get to the full mound. What's the progression for the Rays? What kind of tricks have you seen throughout the years to help a player get acclimated to the mound to make sure that is seamless and goes well?
Yeah, I think part of the evolution for us, and it's never been a true, for us, obviously it was 20 something years ago, flat ground, but so much we've learned about flat ground and,
sure.
Your front foot strike and how it's affecting lead leg block, what it's doing with the arm and the backside. There's so much that we have come to learn about that flat ground is more about throwing back to the interior, compression throws. So get to distance. Where are you that day? Is it 150? Was it 90? What are you doing in your prep? And basically the prep are just, getting ready to stress them for acceleration is more of that compression throw, more of that throwing with intensity as they're coming back in and not necessarily finishing down. And I'm not saying, again, I think this is where some of the flexibility and Corey, you've been there. And I know we're going to be there at some point, and every other team out there where some guy's going to be like, this is what I do. At some point,
right.
You have to have a give and take. And whether we believe in flat ground, which we are not a traditional flat ground organization as far as that goes, but people do throw it. And I think a large part of that comes when they are healthy with our major league pitching coach and with our pitching group. And, it's not a bad thing. It's just not a philosophy. And I think you watch teams around the game and Corey, places you've been and where you are. And those listening, we know that flat ground isn't what it used to be, but it doesn't mean that it's dead, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just something that has changed in thought because we're a lot more comfortable going to the mound more than we once were. And I think that's a big part in people remembering is just it's been a growth. So as we do the compression throws, for us, it becomes more of a mound blend. So mound blend is just more walking down the mound. The mound blend is going to be more introducing that downhill slope. It's not necessarily throwing from the mound off the rubber. It's going to be more of the catcher standing there and the ability to finish. So instead of with the flat ground, you're going to introduce it with the downhill plane, but walking into it, walking through it, and finishing through it, and just introducing how it's going to feel again to get to that downhill slope. Thought process in there front foot's where it needs to be. You start to reintroduce that lead leg block. You start to introduce, what should have already been the hip trunk separation, and then get the arm where it needs to be up in space and just get them feeling comfortable. Because if you remember, used to be a point in time where that wasn't introduced, and then we would just do like that short box. Well, the short box is just a side with a catcher bumped up front, but what have we done to transition? And I think that mound blend has been a big learning moment for me. It was something that was introduced to me, and it's nothing that I'm going to sit here and take credit for by any stretch, but it's something that now I look at it and go, golly, that makes so much sense. How did we not see that? And when it was brought, we were like, well, that's an easy addition. That's an easy change. And I think that for us has been one of the bigger impactful changes that we see in the transition from long toss or, throwing progression into your compression throws, and now into your mound blend where you're introducing and you're starting to gain confidence and kind of wake up the mentals and the physicals of, hey, here it comes. Your next phase is right around the corner.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, like you said, we've evolved and looked at things a little bit more scientifically and said, you know what, this is more advantageous than that. And it's amazing how when you bring that information to a player and you give them just the why, it goes a long way into their buy-in. And, kind of to that point, obviously this podcast is hopefully going to be listened by a lot of athletic training students and young professionals that are looking to get into baseball, and with social media being the way it is, and there's throwing programs being thrown around social media right now that aren't really valid or reliable in a lot of their methods. And hearing from somebody like yourself that has done it in the trenches for as many years, what advice would you give to a young athletic trainer that might be going into their first Tommy John rehab? Because obviously we're seeing younger and younger athletes. So the high school athletic trainer is now seeing this. The collegiate athletic trainer at every level is seeing this. What advice would you give them as they're tackling their first throwing program for a player returning from Tommy John?
My advice would be to just speak to people who have been there and done that. But beyond that, I would encourage them to reach out to somebody through baseball, not because other levels or other sports don't necessarily know how to do it, but unfortunately there's no sport that knows how to do it as well as baseball. And if you can speak to one or two people, you're going to pull some benchmarks out of there. You're going to understand. Does every organization do it the same? Absolutely not. Do some organizations get to the mound a little quicker? Yes. Some organizations go a little later? Yes. But ultimately, if you look at the end range, you're going to see the same landing spot. So it's important for them to understand everybody is going to have a different potential philosophy, and that they need to have their own mindset, but there's certain things you don't miss. There's certain things you don't mess with. And there's one thing that we'll never be able to change, and that's the healing process of the body. I think we learned years ago, and people tried to cut corners, and people tried to shave time off, and it just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening under a traditional Tommy John, or now we're going into multiple UCLs on players. You're not going to cut a corner. I think that's advice number one. Don't make promises you can't deliver on, because the body is going to heal how the body heals. The surgeon is going to have ultimate control, and the player is going to put their trust in you. And not every rehab is going to go the way we want it to go. And we can do everything the right way and take our time, XYZ, you name it. And some things don't go the way we want it to. And then you have to change course. And that's where they have to be willing to take a step back and ask for help, ask for advice. And I think it's important for those of us who are in these seats and those of us who have been in the game to acknowledge we still ask questions and we still ask for help. So it is not any way, shape, or form embarrassing or a way to feel vulnerable if you're saying, I don't know. So reach out to somebody, make a cold call. If there's an affiliate in your town, say, hey, if you have a few minutes, I'm a local athletic trainer, I'm a local allied health professional. How do you guys go about this? And you'll find that people will be more open than you might think. And by collecting that information and using your research, you're going to find your own direction.
Well, this has been outstanding, Joe. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you, on top of being a head athletic trainer for a Major League Baseball team, you're also a doctor of athletic training student at FIU right now. So I know you got homework on top of your day-to-day. So I appreciate you taking the time and giving us this insight, and hopefully professionals out there take some of your advice and we get these players back safer and healthier.
No, and I really appreciate the time, and I'm not sleeping as much with the homework, but I'm loving every minute of the challenge, and it's been great. And I just hope and encourage everybody out there to keep learning, keep trying, and just realizing none of us know all the answers, and that we've got a group around us within baseball and even external from baseball that just want to help push the profession and get the athletes back on the field, and that we can all do that together instead of separately.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Corey. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Inside Athletic Training's Tales of the Tape, the Tommy John series. And for more information about PBATS, please visit pbats.com.